Robert F. Kennedy Jr. is nominated to be HHS Secretary. That's Health and Human Services. That means that if he makes it all the way there, he's going to be in charge of the FDA, the NIH, and more. He's going to be in charge of CMS. He's going to be in charge of the whole federal healthcare apparatus. It's a big role. And in this video, I'm going to talk about a lot of things. I'm going to talk about number one, is he going to make it there? Number two, I'm going to talk about the reaction this is getting from doctors all over the place and public health experts. That's right. The real experts, the ones that knew 2-year-olds were supposed to wear that cloth mask, those kind of experts. I'm going to talk about what he might be doing in that role. I'm going to talk about some of his views. And this is going to cover a couple of posts that have already appeared on Vinay Prasad's Observations and Thoughts. And it's going to cover a forthcoming post that's going to appear on Vinay Prasad's Observations and Thoughts. So we're going to get into it all in this video. All right. So first, I was just saying on a recent podcast of the VPZD show that I would be skeptical that RFK Jr. makes it all the way there to HHS Secretary. I was skeptical he'd be nominated, and I had to eat that. I had to eat that very soon because right after that show, I saw that he was nominated by Donald Trump. So this is really quite remarkable that Donald Trump has nominated RFK Jr. I think it speaks to many things. One, he probably made a promise to RFK Jr. that in exchange for your endorsement, I'm going to give you a big role, and he's honoring that promise. Number two, there probably are a lot of people who are upset with him making this choice, particularly the pro-corporate people in his administration. And so, it's a big and bold move. Now let's talk about, will he make it there? So I have a post from my stack. It's called, will RFK Jr. make it all the way to HHS Secretary? And I think I'm worried that he is not going to make it all the way there. And I think that's because he faces unique threats, unique challenges to getting all the way to HHS Secretary that other people don't face. We'll walk through that. One is, if Trump really wanted to make it happen, he could make it a recess appointment. He could do it in the recess period and put him in there, and then later he'd have to come up for Senate confirmation. We'll see how that goes, but at least he would have had a foot in the door. So we'll see what happens to that. But if he doesn't do that, or if it inevitably comes to Senate confirmation, RFK Jr. is going to face tough questions. I mean, he's going to be interrogated very hard, and there's a few reasons why. Number one is his prior statements. He has a long list of prior statements and prior positions on a number of issues, and many of those positions are quite unpopular. In some, I've said in a Sensible Medicine podcast, there's a kernel of truth to what he's saying, and some, there's some errors in what he's saying, and I think those are going to be used to bludgeon him. Number two, but the biggest reason, because to be honest, number one, a lot of the Trump appointees have things in their past that are going to be brought up in the hearings that are going to be quite unpleasant, but I think they might sail through. But he has something that no one else has, which is he is the biggest threat to profits of any of these other people. Not the defense secretary, not Matt Gaetz, an attorney general. The biggest threat to money, to people making money, is RFK Jr. And there is a lot of money at stake here. We're probably talking more than $1 trillion at stake, but we're probably talking about he's a serious threat to hundreds of billions of dollars. He's a threat to the entire biopharmaceutical industry. He's a threat to the public health complex. He's a threat to all the people making unproven devices. He's a threat to big agriculture, big food. He's a threat to environmental polluters. He's a threat to all these people, and they have been lobbying for years to get a foothold in Washington. They've been donating to all sorts of campaigns. I was surprised recently to see they've even donated to Elizabeth Warren. I guess so much for being a progressive that she's taking money from the pharmaceutical industry. I'm surprised to see that. They've donated all these people, and that money is going to talk. That money's going to buy influence, and they're going to work 100% to get this guy out because he's the greatest threat. And instead, last time when Trump was there, who did he put forward? Alex Azar, a guy with extremely close ties and I think past executive experience in the pharmaceutical firm. Scott Gottlieb, the classic sellout at FDA who went right to Pfizer and sat on the board. And then you can read Alex Berenson, what he has to say about what Scott Gottlieb did to try to pressure Alex Berenson for not talking about the vaccine mandates and things like that. So Trump, has previously picked pro-corporate people. RFK Jr. is not a pro-corporate person, so he is different. He's the biggest threat to money. And trust me, when money is there at stake, people will do anything to try to torpedo him. And you might remember Tom Daschle was torpedoed. He was torpedoed because he didn't pay a nanny over the table. Something that probably lots of people have done, to pay a nanny in cash, so that he didn't have to pay some tax on that or something. That was what torpedoed him. RFK Jr., there's a lot more than not paying some nanny in cash. Okay, I'm sure there's a lot more they're going to use to torpedo him. But we'll see if he makes it through. Trump has 53 senators. Trump has He could push it through if he wanted. He could recess appoint him, and he could just go by party line vote, and he might get him through. Now, I think if Matt Gaetz makes it through, but RFK Jr. doesn't, that means that money talks. That the only explanation for that would be that the pharmaceutical industry prevented it from getting there. Okay, now let me argue the other side of the coin. So this is what I talk about in the piece. I think there are a number of reasons to think, well, maybe he does make it through. For those people out there who are rooting for him, maybe there are reasons he could make it through. One is, although he has many views and many controversial takes, he has some views that are very popular. He hates environmental pollutants. He hates what we're doing with food and the garbage we're feeding children. He thinks children should be fed better food. I think no matter what you feel about his policies, you have to admit I think he has his heart in the right place when it comes to kids. He hates the corrupt role of pharma. He hates the revolving door politics. He hates the corruption in Washington. These are popular ideas, and he will have a huge chunk of the public on his side for those ideas. 2, unlike others, he is close to a traditional politician. He's played this game before. He knows how to navigate these circles. He might be able to get through. Number 3, although he's not a doctor, by the way, I see some people say, he's not a doctor, how can he be HHS Secretary? These people don't know anything because most HHS Secretaries are not doctors. They're usually useless politicians and useless bureaucrats who work for their own corporate interests. They don't do anything of substance in their term. He's different than that. He's an environmental lawyer and who's somebody who's probably going to try to shake things up and not just try to self-aggrandize and use it as a jumping stone, use it as a springboard to their own consulting career. So he's different than the typical sellout who takes this job. He's part of the Kennedy family, and Trump supposedly likes him a lot. They say Trump really, really likes Bobby. So he's a likable guy, and he has that sort of historic gravitas coming with him. He has strange across-the-aisle appeal. Jared Polis, the successful governor of Colorado, he endorsed him, and he said that, a big chunk of my constituency is pro-raw milk, which we're going to talk about. And a big chunk of his constituency was against the vaccine mandates for COVID-19, which I was, of course, against because only an idiot would have implemented a mandate that had no third-party benefit and run trials where you didn't even test if there was third-party benefit. Finally, in his favor, there's less of a shock factor. This has been coming for some time now. People have been talking that he might be nominated. The nomination is coming now. The more you put the person, you put the media in the water slowly, the more you can get things done. If you just shocked him with RFK Jr. right off the bat, they would have been panicked. But they've seen Trump with RFK Jr., so they're kind of eased into it. I think that does count for something. But in the video I did with Z-Dog, I was skeptical. I think they're going to try to torpedo him. There's nobody who's a threat to more money than this guy, and a lot of that corporatism is in the Republican Party. I mean, a lot of those donations have gone to that party. So will they approve this guy? I don't know. He's also typically, historically a Democrat. So that's another thing he's got against him. So we shall see. We shall see if he makes it all the way through. I think that I've given 9 suggestions in a prior blog post of what he could do. And it's a prior video on this channel, except by then I thought of the 10th one. What can a Trump administration mean for healthcare? I think if he goes for that as a target, he'll be a very formidable force. All right, well, that was my first post, which I think is true. I should have waited about a couple hours before I speculated he wouldn't be nominated, but, well, I was wrong. He got nominated. I'm surprised. But they're coming for him. I mean, there's nobody that they're going to come at harder than this guy. All right, number 2. What are these people saying? Ashish Jha. A lot of folks are criticizing RFK Jr. because he doesn't have health experience. That's not a concern in my mind. Most HHS secretaries don't. RFK's problem is that he's a series of ideas that have just proven to be wrong. Oh, and that's different than Ashish Jha, Mr. We should mask kids. We should keep schools closed. Mr. We should give boosters to people who just had COVID. Mr. Paxlovid works even if you've already had COVID once or twice and it works the second time. There's nobody who's sold more bullshit than Ashish Jha. Okay, this guy is not an evidence-based guy. This guy is a pandering, academic, sellout, politician, lackey, and he's criticizing RFK Jr. Okay, I put 0% stock in what Ashish Jha thinks. People like Ashish Jha paved the way for RFK Jr. There's a video that's circulating on the internet, and I think I put it in my post, and you can find it on Anish Koka's Twitter feed. That's an astonishing video where a member from Congress is grilling David Zweig, who was a reporter for The Atlantic and other publications. And David Zweig was one of the few good reporters who actually looked to see what other countries were doing and realized that they weren't masking their kids. And he called up people with diverse views, and he got some views where some people, like myself, told him there's not any evidence to support masking kids, particularly no evidence to support cloth masking for any age, and no evidence to support masking for any age in the community. That's contradicted by, I think, the best evidence at the time, but certainly not for young kids. That's really stupid. That's particularly stupid. And he was testifying that. And then this person grills him and says, well, are you a doctor? Are you this? Are you that? Are you this? And he's like, ma'am, I think you know I'm a journalist. And she's like, oh, are you this? And there's like, Dr. Ja, are you a doctor? And he's like, yes, I am. I'm an expert in pandemic policy. That was news to me. I thought he was one of those March 2020 experts, not one of those 1998 experts. But all right, he's an expert. And then he said, no expert I know even questions masking kids, or something to that effect. You can find the quote. That's just batshit crazy and wrong. And it was the European CDC that said don't mask anyone under 6. The Swedes never did it under 12. Many European nations didn't do it. He's totally wrong. Now, why did he say that? He said what he needed to say to gain favor in the Democratic Party so that they would like him. And he went on TV pandering constantly to Biden. And it was revealed in a New York Times story that he had access to decisions the Biden administration was going to make before they made it, so he could write pandering op-eds the moment that those decisions were made, so he could pander and kiss up more and kiss his ass more so that he would become the White House czar, which was what he became. And in that role, he famously said, there's a reason why God gave us 2 arms, one for the annual flu shot and one for the annual COVID shot. But it seems like God gave us 2 arms, one to vote for Donald J. Trump, and then the other to give the middle finger to people like Ashish Jha in their thumbs up for RFK Jr. So that's what the 2 arms seem to be for. No, I joke. But of course, the 2 arms thing statement was really stupid, dishonest, arrogant. And what he could have done is demand these multi-billion-dollar corporations run some studies to show that the annual booster is better. He didn't do that because the new position of the Democratic Party is the sellout corporatist position where they do whatever enriches these companies. And that's been the position of a lot of politicians for a long time now. And Bobby Kennedy is one of the few people who that's not his position. I think he may err in the other direction and discount actually useful medical products, but he ain't erring in the direction of giving these companies a pass to sell costly, toxic, expensive medical products. He makes a different type of error than the error we're used to. My whole life, there's only one error that people make, and that's approving shit that don't work, that charges a shit ton of money, and then they bleed the public dry, and wages are stagnating, and premiums rise, and people are discontent. Bobby Kennedy is probably not going to do any of that. Even the drugs he likes are these repurposed drugs that are cheap. I think most of them just don't work. They don't work for the repurposed use, but they're cheap rather than the expensive drugs that don't work that people like Ashish Jha and Bob Califf approve. Bob Califf famously approved Exondys 57. That doesn't work. He liked that. But they don't approve the cheap drugs. I see the battery has died on this thing. I'm going to change the battery because I like to make sure it's actually recording. And I'm not going to edit this out because this is the way I make my videos. No cuts. I don't like the cuts, and I don't like when they get... Turn on. Okay, good. All right, so my point there is that I think he will make a different type of error. That error will be to reject things. He's perhaps overly skeptical of some products, some chemicals, etc., but not the opposite error, the corporate error that we're used to. It's a different type of error. And I think his error... somebody said that Bobby Kennedy's like a magic 8-ball. We don't know what he's going to do. I don't think so. He's not a capricious or erratic force. He's a different philosophy. I've written in pieces. He has a environmental lawyer policy where they have a extremely low threshold to think something is a toxin or causing some problem. He doesn't have a sort of a very rigorous evidence-based philosophy on what's a toxin and what's a problem. Okay. Ashish Jha, of course, came to the attention of Biden, became the Biden administration, and did all these stupid things. And he's complaining about Bobby Kennedy. I saw Jennifer Nuzzo, who I like, at Brown University. She said, it's important that people choose to avail themselves of the enormous benefit of vaccines. The problem isn't that we don't have facts on our side. The problem is anti-vaxxers like RFK Jr. fabricate sciencey sounding false info to scare people off vaccines. And then I told her, Jennifer, the CDC, FDA, and your boss, Ashish Jha, fabricated sciencey sounding statements to support masking 2-year-olds, boosting adolescent men who had just had COVID, and recommending Paxlovid for vaccinated people. That's what brought us to this point. The establishment lying, so obviously lying, and pushing vaccines and mandates when they knew that they would not halt transmission. They knew they'd have no third-party benefit. I'd written many op-eds telling them not to do that. They pushed that, and that brings us to where we are now with massive distrust. Margaret Smelkinson, who is a PhD scientist who works at the NIH, says, quote, she's summarizing what Jaw says in the video sarcastically, quote, you mere peon do not have enough medical degrees to tell us your schools are open. Go order some more Old Navy masks and leave the science to the experts. Now someone go fetch me Randy Weingartner. We've got some science stuff here for her to edit, end quote. And her joke is really funny because famously Rochelle Walensky coordinated CDC guidance with the American Federation of Teachers President Randy Weingartner, just so that the teachers could make sure that schools didn't reopen, so that a generation of kids was destroyed. You also got Peter Marks. Peter Marks is critical of RFK Jr. I write, this is Rick from Stat. He says, Peter Marks probably has been in more meetings with RFK Jr. than any other top official. I asked him point blank about Kennedy's command of science. And I said, you should also note that Peter Marks has a poor command of science. He approved boosters for kids who had already had COVID with no data. He forced out Gruber and Krause. I would fire him ASAP. Oh, I would fire this guy. Got to get fired. Peter Marks has got to get fired. Bob Califf's got to go. People got to get fired. Mandy Cohen, I hope she's fired before. She's probably going to walk out before January 20th because she did a terrible job at CDC. Why is Peter Marks so bad? Peter Marks put pressure on Marion Gruber and Phil Krause, the two reviewers at FDA, because they didn't want to give the Pfizer-BioNTech vaccine a full biological licensing agreement. And that reason is Biden needed that BLA because their legal team felt that you could not have mandates without the BLA. The EUA, the emergency use authorization, could not be used to compel mandates, so they had to ram through that BLA through FDA. Peter was happy to oblige, but the FDA experts who had done vaccine regulation for 30 years didn't want to do that. That is so bad. That's something the media will never discuss because they're just so one-sided. They talk about conspiracy theorist Bobby Kennedy. Where were they talking about the fact that beaches were closed, that we were masking kids? They were complicit in just complete conspiracy theorists. The idea a cloth mask would help. The idea that closing outdoor venues would help. This was conspiracy theory level craziness. I have so many examples that I've selected of, but I can't even give them all in this video. So to turn around and say that Robert F. Kennedy Jr., he's anti-science, when you've been putting out more anti-science than anyone the last few years, is quite rich to me. Okay, now my third part of the video. What about other countries? A litmus test for where RFK Jr. is completely off base. He probably wouldn't like me drinking this. I think this is a actual Coca-Cola with high fructose corn syrup. And I actually don't think it's that good for my health, but I'll drink it occasionally. But I think he doesn't like me drinking it. I think he's probably right. It's not healthy for me to drink it. But I don't think he would actually ban this. I think he'll ban other things and maybe some of the colors, but he won't ban this. I don't think he'll go that far because I think he does believe in personal autonomy in sort of a deep way that other people don't. So, many people, the media, they're saying he's completely off base, he's a conspiracy theorist, he's a crank, etc. I have a very simple litmus test to separate which of his views are completely wackadoodle off base and which of his views are still within the canon of things we ought to discuss and where the Overton window ought to move and things we should think about. And my view is, what do other countries do? A litmus test for where he's off base. This will come out tomorrow morning on my Substack. Vinay Prasad's Observations and Thoughts at drvinayprasad.com. Go there, become a subscriber. It's the best place to follow what I'm saying. A simple litmus test. Are there other sensible nations who are doing what he says? So let's run through some of his views and let's see if there are other nations that do it. And what I'm saying is, if other nations do it, it doesn't mean it's right. Let me be clear. If other nations do it, it doesn't mean it's right, but it does mean it's not absolutely crazy, okay? It's not a conspiracy theory if Switzerland does it. It might not be right. We can debate that, but don't demonize him for suggesting things that other smart countries are doing, okay? And this also applied to the pandemic. You could not say we shouldn't mask toddlers, even though they weren't doing it in Europe. That's crazy. People wanted to label that a, misinformation. It's not. It's something to debate. Obviously, now history has vindicated people like me who said the right thing all along because we're not idiots. Okay, raw milk. RFK Jr. wants Americans to have the ability to buy unpasteurized milk. I personally don't drink that much milk. That's one. Two, I'm probably not going to drink unpasteurized milk. I'm not interested in it, okay? But some people are. I'm not interested in lots of things. I'm interested in bungee jumping. I'm not going to do that either. But some people are. Bungee jumping, to me, I'm not going to ban it. If you want to do it, you're taking the risk. And if you drink unpasteurized milk, you're taking the risk. And what is the risk? Emily Oster calculates the risk is 11 million people drink unpasteurized milk. 760 had a food illness last year, which is roughly 7 in 100,000. And that's a risk that we allow healthy people to accept. It's like bungee jumping. So my litmus test, do other nations do it? And the answer is raw milk is legally available in many other nations, including England, New Zealand, France, Italy, Germany, Norway, Sweden, Finland, and Denmark. So my point is, it's not a crazy proposal for him to put that on the table. What he does there, how many is there really going to be a bonanza of people who don't now drink raw milk, drinking raw milk? I doubt it. Are a lot of people going to get sick as a result? I doubt it. Is there some upside to it? What about the flavor? This is sort of a subjective, ineffable characteristic. I think Bobby Kennedy should be given a pass on raw milk. It's a completely reasonable proposal. You don't like it, you don't have to fucking drink raw milk, okay? But he has suggested it. A lot of other nations do it. It's reasonable, okay? It's not completely out of the realm of what's reasonable. Fluoride in the water. I'm going to come back to this because I have somebody doing a big investigation into fluoride and cognitive function, those epidemiology and those sort of almost economic studies that are trying to get at that causality. And I'm also going to look at fluoride on dental cavities. And I also want to look at dental cavities defined as symptomatic dental cavities and not like things discovered on x-ray incidentally. So I'm trying to tease this out. We're going to do a big literature thing on this. But in the meantime, let's apply the litmus test. There is a graph that I'm going to put in my figure. It's water fluorination by countries, and it varies all over the place. There are many countries, Germany, Norway, Sweden, that don't put fluoride in the water. And you can look it up. It's called water fluorination, fluoridination by country. And you can see which countries don't do it, okay? And a lot of sensible countries don't do it. And some municipalities, I think I lived in Portland, they didn't do it. There'll be some trade-off there. There might be a few more cavities, and then there might not be these other things. These other things might not be that real at the doses that are being given. But again, it's not conspiracy theory territory. It's something that's within the realm of what other people do, and it's something we can debate. Again, it's not saying he's right or wrong. It's just saying it's not a reason to prima facie throw someone out or say they're crazy. COVID-19 policy. He opposed masking kids. Well, it turns out all the European nations did that, and they were smarter too. He opposed COVID vaccines for kids. Well, it turns out a lot of European nations didn't do that. MMR vaccine. In my opinion, the MMR vaccine is clearly not linked to autism with anything higher than an odds ratio of 1.02, which is a very stringent test, and that was shown nicely by Anders in the Annals of Internal Medicine. Now, all European nations, to my knowledge, recommend MMR vaccines. Japan, however, allows a single dose of MMR. No country I'm aware of says don't give it because of the concern of autism. So there, I think, he falls in the bucket of no other sensible country holds his position. So he's going beyond sensible countries. So there, I think he should get a lot of pushback. And honestly, I don't think he's going to do it. He's not going to ban the vaccine. He may try to lower and reduce the requirements and compulsion around it. And actually, that might be actually more akin to some European nations. We could have that conversation. But he's not going to ban the vaccine. Hep B vaccine. Switzerland and Austria do not recommend Hep B vaccine for low-risk babies at birth. They recommend it for high-risk babies at birth. In the U.S., all mothers are screened for Hep B. There could be some debate here. I have a chart in my figure, in my essay, comparing different countries. Some recommend it for specific groups only at birth, but many of them recommend it at 3 weeks or 6 weeks or 8 weeks or et cetera, different time periods. So, again, I think we should be able to debate what is different sensible nations do. And finally, if I was really advising RFK Jr., I'd say there's a simple way to do this. We need to do a cluster randomized study. The current U.S. vaccine program, which is a very aggressive scheme for childhood immunization, in a cluster randomized fashion, so different places will be randomized to the schedule. Other places will be randomized to different schedules, and then we can follow up kids at 3 years and 5 years and 6 years and 7 years and see, are there differences in disease and are there differences in some of these other safety concerns people worry about. Now, you're going to say, how is it ethical to consent to this study? The study will only be for people who want to consent to the study. Okay, so, that's one thing, so you don't need to get into that. There'll be people who, like in all studies, don't fall into the study. But it's testing the strategy of U.S. versus other countries. The next thing is, there are some people who are critics of vaccination who say it's not individual vaccines that have these side effects on cognitive function or whatever, it's the combination and the aggressiveness of our schedule. The only way to test that is to randomize people to different schedules. You'll never be able to solve that in the conventional system. So he should champion that randomized study, cluster randomized factorial design. I think it would be very clever. And we might learn that Sweden has it best or Denmark has it best, and that, there might even be things you don't even know you're looking for. You'll learn that actually one of these schedules has the best all-cause mortality, as some work by Stablebend and others has found for different vaccine programs. So you might learn something you don't even otherwise know. Banning pesticides. Many of the pesticides he wants to ban are banned in the European Union. Banning food additives. Many of the food additives he wants to ban are banned in the European Union. Revolving door politics. Many of the things he wants to do to eliminate conflict in the system are banned in Europe and banned in other countries. And direct-to-consumer advertising is banned in every other country but the US and New Zealand. So in these respects, if what he's saying is in line with other nations, you have to say that's a reasonable debate. Final point. The fourth part of this video. I see a lot of scientists saying vaccine saves lives. You have to, and vaccines work. Their vaccines are safe and effective. You have to stop saying that. You're not helping anybody by making a blanket statement. What if I were to say drugs are safe and effective? What does that even mean? There's so many drugs. They're given for different purposes to different people. Some drugs are life-saving and beneficial to some people when given at the right time, but you can't make a blanket statement about everything. So let's talk about vaccines. Some vaccines, I think there's a good reason why you'd put a lot of impetus in getting people to take it, where it's something that if it gets above a certain threshold, you can extinguish a disease like smallpox or like measles or like polio. That's an important vaccine, okay? That's a category of vaccines are highly effective and very important. Then there's a category of vaccines that are incredibly debatable. The novel vaccine for maternal RSV given to the pregnant woman to protect the baby has a reduction in a New England Journal paper of lower respiratory tract infection hospitalization caused by RSV. But then myself and Dave Aleli wrote to the New England Journal asking them to provide the data on lower respiratory tract infection hospitalizations of any cause, and that's not significantly reduced. So, and there's also this question of, does it cause low birth weight? That's a vaccine that I think people should be critical of and highly skeptical of, and we should debate that vaccine. And then there are finally vaccines that actually did more harm than good. Boosting young men with COVID-19 vaccines, giving vaccines to young people who've already had COVID. These harmed people. They had net harm. There was no upside. There was a net negative from doing that. Pushing adenoviral vector vaccines in 18-year-old women was net harmful. Some women had VIT as a result of that. Some women died because of that. Okay, that's net harmful. We had many bad vaccine programs. There have been vaccines that didn't come to market for HIV, for instance, that increased the rate with which you get HIV. Not all vaccines are good. Only a complete idiot would say something like vaccines good. And I think that that's the problem, is that, it's so dishonest to try to go and rebut RFK Jr. when you say something so trite and empty like that. And yet to me, that feels like what so many academics say. Because I think they haven't actually read, I come back to this over and over again. There was recently a tweet by Nature, and it said a woman injected herself with viruses because she has breast cancer, and even though, it was successful, people criticize her for self-experimentation. And everyone says, well, she should be allowed to do it. She shouldn't be allowed to do it. Nobody actually reads the case report, which I read. I have to click twice to get it. And it basically said there's a woman with breast cancer. She had the usual treatment. A couple years later, came back. They cut it out. A couple years later, came back again. It was like a pimple at the site, and there's no other disease elsewhere. She injected it with the virus for a few months. The pimple got a little bit more squishy, and then they cut it out. Well, if she hadn't injected it with the virus, it would have just been cut out. And either way, the probability of cure is extremely high. So did injecting it with a virus do anything? I don't know. But nobody who's commenting even fucking clicked on the links and read the paper. And that's what medicine is. Nobody reads anything. Everyone's telling me, somebody emailed me and said, his stance on childhood immunization is wrong, and you should tweet that like you support all the U.S. childhood schedule. And I was like, well, there are differences between countries, so which ones do I support? I'm the one who's going to say the cluster randomized trial is the best way to do it, because you can't tweet something you haven't looked into and you don't really know for sure. So, phase 4 safety. One thing that I would encourage him strongly, and many of the people who say they're safe, all drug products are safe. We know they're safe. We haven't found safety signals. Do you know how bad the U.S. safety surveillance system is? You could miss huge safety signals for years because we have a shitty passive surveillance system. He should go and build an active surveillance system. You will find tons of safety signals we don't know exist. We should do more long-term randomized studies. We should keep people blinded longer for some products. There is no data that somebody should take an SSRI for 7 versus 8 years, for instance. Those are studies we need to do. What are the side effects of taking it for 8 years? That's poorly understood. I think there could be safety signals that are missed because our phase 4 apparatus is very poor. So, overall points. He has a lot of points, okay? Anyone who dismisses him very casually is not listening to what he says. He has a lot of points. He also does say things, I think, outside of the bounds. A simple litmus test is, do other nations do it? If other nations do it, doesn't mean he's right, but it does mean it's a dialogue we should have and we could have. If other nations don't do it, I would encourage him to put those on the back burner, the ones that no other nation is doing. But there's so many things he's suggesting that other nations do, and that should be something we have. And the people who criticize him as a bad pick, etc. So first of all, can you name a single other he's a bad pick for HHS Secretary. Tell me the name of a single other HHS Secretary in the history of America. And if you don't know the answer to that question, then maybe you don't know what it means to be a good pick. I think Alex was a terrible pick. I think Javier is a terrible pick. I don't think they know anything about healthcare, and I don't think they even have any philosophy of what they want to do. I think every pick I've ever seen for any of these agencies has always been a corporatist. Bob Califf is a corporate sellout. Ashish Jha, corporate sellout. These people are corporatists, meaning they do things to promote the interests of rich companies that don't always give us information for the general public. This is literally the first time I've ever seen anyone be nominated for any position who I truly think is not a pro-corporate guy. He's an anti-corporate guy. He will make errors. Everyone makes errors, but he will make a different type of error than the type of error that's been made. And we should work very hard on getting him to minimize that error, to not be too skeptical when you don't need to be. But he may do things that no one has ever been able to do, like halting the disgusting conflicts of interest that pervade these agencies, the rot. The FDA works for pharma. I saw somebody say, if he comes into HHS, many people at the FDA are going to resign. Well, guess what? Good. Resign. Go ahead, resign. Nobody wants you there anyway. You're fucking rubber stamping everything for years and you're doing a shitty job. But more importantly, how are you going to like it if the first thing they do is pass a bill that says you can't work for the pharma industry for a 5-year cooling off period? So go ahead and resign. But what are you going to do? Because your whole life plan was to go work for pharma. Now you're shit out of luck. And guess what you're going to do? You're not going to resign. So I think the first thing he should do is pass that bill that you're not allowed to go to pharma for 5 years. Ain't no one resigning now. They got nothing. They're going to work for FDA. All right? That's how you stop that. I'm going to tweet that right after I put this video because I think it's funny. It's true. We were the ones, my team in 2016, myself and Jeff BN, we published in the BMJ that something like 60 or 70% of reviewers at FDA, the moment they left FDA, if they were to leave FDA, that they went to consult for or work for the biopharmaceutical industry. These are people who are typically medical doctors, so they could have gone to practice medicine, but they didn't because they knew what their skill set was good for, which was ramming through bullshit products. The last thing I'd say is, people who don't closely follow the FDA just don't know what's been going on. They approve so many bad drugs. Where is the New York Times story on Voxelotor? This drug was approved for years for sickle cell disease. It kills kids or increases VOD. We don't even know. The Pfizer press release is threadbare. Where is your New York Times report on that? Where is the Washington Post report on that? Where is the reports on selinexor and the Boston study? Nobody even covers this. They don't know shit about what the FDA is doing, and now suddenly they know that RFK is a threat. You don't know shit about what they do, so how the fuck do you know that he's a threat, okay? You don't know anything about it. Study what they've approved. The FDA is a rubber stamp for pharma. They make pharma so rich that their abuses have come to light because of the pandemic, how they abuse the system and force people to get unnecessary medical products, how people like Ashish Jha parrot pharmaceutical lines that Paxlovid will lower your rate of long COVID, things like that. Bob Califf said something to the effect of antivirals have found preliminary epidemiologic evidence to lower the rate of long COVID. This is bullshit. Run a randomized study and show me Paxlovid lowers the rate of long COVID. There's no such trial. There is a trial of Paxlovid in long COVID. It was a negative study. So these people have been parroting bullshit claims for years, and this is the first guy who probably has the potential to mop it all up, and he is a big threat. So they're not going to let him through. They're going to do everything to prevent him from coming through. So to me, I will be astonished if he comes through. And once he gets through, if he were to get through, I would say, don't count on having 4 years, Bobby. You're going to have a very, very narrow window, and they're going to be looking to hang you for anything you do. So do not go after the things that no country does. Do not go after that. Focus, Bobby. Focus on the things that some other countries are doing, and focus on building things that will endure after you're gone. Build the phase 4 surveillance system. Build in rules around randomized studies and how they should be conducted. Launch cluster randomized trials. These are things that will endure after you're done. The answer to the cluster randomized randomized trial of vaccine schedule will shut every one of these people up. It will shut them up. A cluster randomized trial of masking toddlers that doesn't work will shut them up. A randomized study that also shows, for instance, that they have lower acquisition of speech will poison them. It will shut them up. Run the trials that will destroy the people who've said the wrong things for years. Build the systems that will destroy them. Leave those other issues aside. If no other country does it, it's probably gone too far. But focus on what some other countries are doing. You want your raw milk? Fine. I think it's honestly not a big deal. You want to put an advisory out to not fluorinate water, which are going to turn as red states will not be fluoride in it and the blue states will, okay? Because, fluoride is a local decision. I think it's not a big deal, probably overall in the grand scheme of all the things he can do, because many other nations don't put fluoride in the water. That's a simple one. And I'm going to come back with a better analysis of caries, et cetera, for people who really want the right answer to the question. But overall, it's like, come on. Ivermectin, forget about ivermectin. Forget about hydroxychloroquine, okay? COVID is a cold. You don't need to take anything for it if you have COVID. Those things never worked, by the way. There may have been a lot of pressure to approve vaccines and not study them properly. For instance, they could have studied them for transmission. You could take 1,000 people, random subset, swab the family members to look for transmission in the study. Build into FDA guidance those provisions so that they have to do the right studies in the future. Forget about getting some, useless repurposed drug approved. If you take the motivation, your anti-corporatist agenda, your anti-conflict agenda, your people agenda, you're also championing body autonomy, you take that, focus on the core, build structures that endure, ignore these issues no countries are doing, then you have a chance for success. But I'm not sure you're going to be able to do it because they're going to come at you hard. I think they're going to come at you hard. And if Gates get in, but he don't get in, we know money talks. And I think there's no one who's a threat to more money than this guy. So we'll see what happens. I think Trump likes him. That's what I hear. So maybe he will actually get the nomination. If Trump really like him, you got to recess appointment this guy. Recess appointment him, and then we'll see what happens. And all the coverage of this issue, I have to read one of this coverage. What was this New York Times article I read about it? I mean, if you don't know anything about the space, why are these reporters writing these articles? Oh, Kennedy's vow to take on big food could alienate his new GOP allies. See that now? This is a smart article. Okay, that's right. That's right. If he really goes at big food, they're gonna there's a lot of money in the shitty food that they force on kids. There's a lot of money because they make it so cheap. Like good food actually tends to cost some money. But where was that article I read about him? It was something like, people are upset that he's critical of vaccines. Stop treating all vaccines as if it's a single monolith. The more you treat it as a monolith, the more you give him fuel. You have to admit, there are some vaccines that are terrible ideas. Why did you push boosters? Why did these colleges mandate it? That vaccine indemnification. He should, Bobby, you totally should, allow vaccine makers to be litigated. They should get their asses litigated for myocarditis and VIT. The university should be litigated for that. Everybody whose son or daughter had a complication of a vaccine that the university forced them to get, that university should get litigated and put a chip in these billion-dollar endowments that they just used for their encampments. Anyway, I don't know what they're doing with that money, but it's not anything good at that. Okay, those are my thoughts. I can't find this. It was such a good article. I mean, by good, I mean, make my point. It made my point. I saw something where it said Bobby Kennedy, some video where it said he'll stop research on drug development and infectious disease for 8 years. I say I wouldn't do that. NIH should still fund ID research. Like, for instance, there's no country on earth that would say we're not going to fund infectious disease research for 8 years. That's a little, too much in the wrong bucket. However, you could say the NIH is run poorly. The person who ran it for so many years has never once studied the optimum way to give grants. Francis Collins did the Human Genome Project. He made a number of false claims. He said we would sequence someone and give him an antihypertensive. He invested too heavily in the thing that he cared about. We need an NIH director who actually studies the process of giving grants, who's not biased, who's not politically biased, who's not trying to censor speech. That's what you should say, Bobby. Those are my suggestions. Oh, and then I say Peter Hotez. Peter Hotez he doesn't like Bobby Kennedy. I was like, Peter Hotez, this is the guy who promoted cloth masking of children and school closure. He's as anti-science as it gets. He may make vaccines, but his brain don't work for policy. All right, anyway, I think those are all my points. Oh, here's what it is. Why Kennedy sees an epidemic of chronic disease. Trends in child health are worrisome, and scientists welcome a renewed focus on food and environmental toxins, but vaccines and fluoride are not the cause. Well, don't defend all vaccines in one monolith. Let him run a cluster randomized trial of US versus Sweden versus Denmark versus, that's a good study. That will actually be like a generational study that will provide us information. Let him study these things. And fluoride, that's no hill to die on. Raw milk and fluoride are not hills to die on. Corruption, I think. And that's the other thing. Everyone's so worried he's going to allow raw milk. They don't give a shit about all the corruption for 40 years. My whole life has been nothing but corruption, revolving door politics. They don't care about any of that. The usual errors are always acceptable. It's the new errors they're worried about. So worried. Raw milk, he can do what he can pour raw milk out his window. It's not going to change that many hospitalizations because it has a very low rate of being unsafe, and most people are not going to drink fucking raw milk. Okay, let raw milk go. Shut up about that. No one cares. I don't care about it. And on his side, I also think he shouldn't fight so hard for it, unless, of course, ironically, the fraction of people who care about raw milk, they care a lot about it. That's why Jared Polis actually endorsed him. I think it's because he knows that some of those people in Colorado, those hippies, they kind of like love that stuff. So anyway, maybe you do have to throw them a few of those bones, but I don't know. I'm not that much in politics. Those are my thoughts. If you like this video, like, subscribe, comment, leave a message below. This is, in my opinion, an evidence. Yeah. So what's my philosophy? I'm not an environmental lawyer skeptic. I'm certainly not a corporatist. I'm 100% anti-corporatist. I think that's the rot in the system. I'm an evidence-based medicine purist, which means to me that all products need good evidence before they're brought to market. That evidence should be commensurate with the price and toxicity. I do think that things that are very cheap and not very toxic and are used for like more serious conditions could have lower evidence. It's the costly stuff that's used for common things that probably need better evidence. There's a sliding scale of being a doctor. I do think toxins and the precautionary principle is valid, and those should be regulated extremely stringently. And I do think that risk is, that people should be willing to have body autonomy and tolerate risk. And I've already articulated where I disagree with him. And the corporate people, I just think, are total sellouts. Like, to be a sheesh jaw and to say that somebody who's already had COVID should take Paxlovid a second time, like, make the company run a study before you say that. Why would you recommend a costly branded product for such a person who's going to recover anyway with no data? It's just so dishonest and so bad. That to me is the real rot. And that's the everyday rot we've had. Rot. So what? People may succeed and get Bobby Kennedy thrown out. And then who are we going to get? Scott Gottlieb. He's going to leave Pfizer and come to be a HHS Secretary. He's going to give more money to pharma. And then when he's done, he's going to go back to pharma and put that money back in his pocket. And then, is he going to get someone like that? Is that what we want? Another sellout going from pharma to HHS back to pharma? Come on. Who wants that? That's terrible. That's why God gave people two arms, because they're voting for this. They voted for it, and that's not what they want. So you like this video, you know what to do. Like, subscribe, comment, leave a message below. A long video on RFK Jr. I occasionally get some reporters saying that they want to ask me questions about my thoughts on the administration or on this. I'm not going to, I don't want to talking to reporters on the phone. I would be interested in anyone saying, I will interview you in a live video, so that, and it's going to be right on YouTube. I'll take any interview on a live thing where it's absolutely unedited and the video feed comes right to YouTube as we're doing it. That's the only way, I think, to talk to reporters, because I think they're just not capable of these conversations, and I think they're just going to quote you out of context and distort what you say, and they have their own agenda, all their own agendas. And I think, I've come to agree with a lot of people that, that they could be sometimes, I didn't used to believe it, that they were the fake news, but they are sometimes they actually are the fake news. Look at how they said about masking kids and all this bullshit for the pandemic, and they were completely wrong about it, unrepentantly wrong, and then they stifled all the other viewpoints. So I may not want to talk to them at all. All right, you like this video, you know what to do. Like, subscribe, comment, leave a message below. drvinayprasad.com. Become a subscriber, sign on to the mailing list. Follow me on Instagram. I'm there now. Against my better judgment. Follow me on Twitter, and until next time.